Hello, my name is Jayla McMurray, and I will be doing my final project on African Americans in horror films. So, for generations, including the earliest form of politics, entertainment, and media, we have been supplied the ideas, messages, and stories which impacts how we view the world at large. Therefore, media reflects the perspective of a community, idea, group, etc. And unfortunately, it can portray an inaccurate or biased portrayal of a marginalized group. And of course, I'll be focusing specifically on those ideas found in horror movies. So firstly, let's start off with a movie that most people probably wouldn't consider a horror movie, which is A Birth of a Nation, 1915. The Birth of a Nation was a film released in 1915. The film was America's first feature-length motion picture and box office success. The first half of the film is set at the outbreak of the Civil War. It follows two families, the Stonemen from the north and the Camerons from the south. It depicts how their lives intertwine as they fight throughout the war. It ends with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And the South is facing harsh treatment due to their defeat by the North. The later half focuses on the reconstruction of the South and frames the KKK as being the heroes. It shows South Carolina just after the war, which is occupied by Black Union soldiers who push whites off the sidewalks, sexually harass white women, and in the most infamous scene, a white woman commits suicide to avoid a black man who is trying to force her into marriage. Black supremacists rig an election, and you also see black legislators drinking, sitting barefoot, and eating fried chicken. The film was full of historical inaccuracies, with scenes such as meetings of Congress, Civil War battles, and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, which were created maliciously to paint African Americans in a negative light. The film's portrayal of African Americans was so horrible that it served as a recruitment tool for the KKK until the 1970s. The film was viewed by millions of people. The film effectively dehumanized Black Americans, which means it effectively served as propaganda. The film tells us that Black Americans are savage-like, ignorant, and incapable of holding authoritative positions. The purpose of film or visual media is to stimulate experiences that communicate ideas, stories, perceptions, or feelings. We can see these types of ideas and tropes in relatively modern-day scary movies. And so for the first theme that I would like to talk about is Black Subservience, which, if you boil it down, it's white heroism and white innocence. The white savior trope is a cinematic trope in which a white character saves non-white characters from unfortunate circumstances. The white protagonist is portrayed to be a sort of messiah figure who often learns something about him or herself through the plight of other characters. It often pushes the narrative that non-white people need a savior or a knight in shining armor to take them out of their unfortunate predicament. In the end, instead of showing the strength and courage of an oppressed group, it shares the story of a good guy doing the right thing. So there are two tropes that fit under the white innocence umbrella, which are the magical Negro and the sacrificial Negro. The magical Negro is a supporting stock character who comes in the aid of the white protagonist. Oftentimes they are very wise, magical, have special powers, and come in the need of the white protagonist. And the sacrificial Negro is another supporting character who oftentimes sacrifices himself so the white protagonist can live or grow or whatever the situation may be. So what these two tropes have in common is that they're made to support the protagonist, and generally they're an underdeveloped character, not really having a story of their own, or just in general is never really explored further than a surface level basic understanding. A perfect example of the magical Negro would be in the movie It, with the character Mike. So in the novel, Mike is treated as an outsider in the town of Terri. He loses his parents in the Black Spot incident, where a white supremacist group burns down this black bar, and he is unable to save his parents, so everyone that was inside of the building dies. In the novel, he actually had quite a complex storyline. His purpose in the book is to point out the horrors of Derry in a non-supernatural sense. The way that people will turn a blind eye to blatant racism that he faces. He's treated like a criminal for the color of his skin. But in the film, it's never mentioned at all. And actually, a lot of his lines were given to his other friends in the loser club. He really only has one point in the movie, which is that he has the weapon that will later on kill It. His purpose is to push the story along. He knows a lot of information because he's the history guy. He knows a lot about Jerry, knows a lot of information about the legend and everything like that. You also see that he doesn't ever talk to anyone one-on-one. He always addresses the group, and he never builds any individual relationships with other people. Overall, he is the most underdeveloped character in the whole movie, which is common amongst that trope of character. And now for my final point, the significance of Black created horror films.
Do you have your deodorant?
Check.
Do you have your cozy clothes?
Got that.
The movie Get Out is about a wealthy suburban white family who means well when they talk highly about Black achievement and racial equality. This admiration poses its own threat. The movie is very metaphorical in its messages. Horror Noire is a documentary about African Americans in horror movies. In this documentary, Peele explains how the movie is, in many ways, a response to the history of Black horror and Black representation in cinema. He points out, for example, that Get Out viewers expected at least one good white person or white savior in the story. Peele deliberately refused to provide one, centering on Black characters and refusing to give white viewers any easy way out in the form of readily identifiable white hero. This movie created spaces for Black people in horror movies. Not only that, it created room for directors and writers. Again, in Horror Noire, Jordan Peele states, "I really made Get Out for Black audiences. In a lot of ways, his movie is a birth of a nation for Black viewers who can recognize the white power is Black horror." The film is from a Black perspective and centers on a Black protagonist, telling a story specific to race, which Peele stated a lot of people were actually against. Black created horror tells more authentic stories about the racial disparities Black people face in America, which is why it's so important in popular media today. In conclusion, pertaining to specifically Black people in horror films, there has been a tremendous amount of propaganda and harmful imagery, which for a long time was the only depiction of African Americans. Overall, we have come a long way in this genre. The discriminatory representation we have been given does not define our identities, but it can help us to understand the society that we live in. And with that said, that concludes my final project.